Now that we have got all this basic setup required, let's get started by creating a new Angular application. Now, this is where you have to decide where do you want to create our applications. I would like to create my application on my desktop, and let's say I want to create a new project. Angular projects are created using ng, so let's have a look at ng-help to identify what are the various options we have. And it says that lists available commands and their short descriptions, and you can type ng help followed by options. Now ng new is a option, so I can say ng new help, and then that's going to give me help on the new option. As you can see, there is plenty of options that we have, but the only thing that we have to do is the first one is the name that we have to give, which is the name of the new workspace. Basically, it's going to create a folder, which is your project folder. Also makes that as your project by name as well. And there are a few other options. I don't think so any of these options are required at this point in time. Let's just go ahead and explore that. So I'm going to type here ng new, and let's say, for example, first app. We can change the name anytime if you want in the future. So this is going to ask you a few questions, just a couple of them. Number one, it asks, do you want a routing? Yes or no? Now, routing is the one that, routing basically is a routing module that enables Angular applications to be single page applications. And the whole purpose of Angular web applications are to create single page applications. Single page applications basically mean that you have one single HTML files and lots of partial files that will be there. And the browser loads only one HTML file and everything else is loaded asynchronously, making an application look very rich in experience. The user experience will be very nice. And there are lots and lots of examples today in the world that you can have a look at, including Gmail, Facebook, and a couple of others. We would be doing this in our project. So at this point in time, we don't want Angular to interfere, but we would be manually configuring all this routing information. So I'm going to simply say no, I don't want this routing to be added. The second question is about style sheet, and I'm going to be using Bootstrap for this particular project, which is one of the most popular, you can say, the CSS framework. It's created by Twitter, and it's really cool. So we're going to use that. I'm just going to leave it as CSS, press enter, and then it's going to create the project scaffolding, all sorts of files it's creating. Sometimes this might look a little intimidating, but we're going to look into most of these as what they are in our project. And it also runs with the npm install. What it does is it would have created a file called package.json. As you can see, the package.json is here. The package.json is the place where you have all the dependencies listed, and it's installing all the dependencies currently. Now, these dependencies include something like transpilation from TypeScript to JavaScript, or building of CSS. There's an RxJS which is used for asynchronous HTTP calls, and there are plenty of them that are installed. Now, additional dependencies like Bootstrap, for example, we might have to install ourselves. If you want to include or combine jQuery along with the Angular, you can do that as well here. And now that it has done, we can open, first of all, note that I'm still in my desktop. I have to get into that folder called as first app. So it's a cd first app. Now, if you're using Visual Studio Code, you should be able to say code dot to open this particular folder in your editor. If not, you can always open Visual Studio Code, and then you can say I want to open that particular file. So I have an open folder option here. Click on that. I go to my desktop. On desktop, I have this first app. Say open. Now here we can have a look at all our files that got generated. Since our Angular application is created using TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, it has few options here like tslint.json. This is basically about the rules and regulations to be followed when you're working with the TypeScript. And you can enable, disable few options from this particular JSON file. So some of the basic rules. A TS config JSON basically has some information such as where do you think the output file should be created, whether the source map should be used, what is the target to be used. That means if you are compiling your TypeScript files into JavaScript, what is the version of ECMAScript standards that you want to follow, so that older browsers get support from here, and so on. Unless we require, we don't need to come back here at all, so we can close this. Of course, there's a readme.md, which actually is in case if you're publishing this into GitHub, you would be able to read all the notes about this particular project. You can totally ignore that. There's a package.json, which is one of the most important files that you might want to be looking into. And that has got some dependencies and development dependencies. And development dependencies include something like frameworks like Jasmine or Karma and TypeScript and stuff like that. So which is only required during development. But these are going to be bundled into your build files as well. These are required. And there are a few shortcut commands here. So when I type ng, this is the command that's going to be used. The ng command is part of the node modules, and there is a .bin directory, and as you can see that inside that you will have an ng. On Windows you will have ng.cmd, so that's what it's going to execute. Even though we have installed globally, it'll pick the one that is available locally whenever we run the command, and that's why this ng is here. So this is where you can come back and rename your project if you feel like. If you're publishing this project into some public repositories, this is where you might want to change the name and versions if you want. So this is the Angular JSON. This is an important file. We would be coming here in a bit to understand what's going on or what are the basic setup that we might want to change. So here, for example, it says that what are the build options, so something like which is your initial HTML. It says that src/index HTML. So if you go to src, you'll see that there is an index HTML. Now instead of this HTML, if you want to serve, say for example, home.html, you can come back and change that over here. Then there is also a main, which says that which is the main file that your Angular CLI should start looking into. Now what happens is that behind the scene Angular CLI uses Webpack, which is a module bundler. So which means the only file that it's going to look into is this main.ts, which is right here under src. We have a main.ts, and then it starts looking into this file, and then it goes into this particular Angular core. I think I can do a control click. No. So if you look at this, node modules at Angular, there is a core, and that has an index.d.ts. Essentially, that's going to be index.js. Now it's going to go into this file, and then it's going to open this one. So like this, it starts from the main.ts and then goes into the entire tree structure and loads all the files that are there in your application, and then bundles that into one single file or a bunch of files that actually it has. So there's a main file, there's a polyfills file. Polyfills are basically files that are required for supporting the older browsers, especially the Internet Explorer. You have one file here called polyfills.ts. You can see that that's here, and lots of things have been commented over here, and you can see that very clearly IE 9, 10, 11 and Chrome less than 55 requires all these polyfills. All we have to do is to select this and then press control / on Windows and command / on Mac, and that's get uncommented. And now if you save it and when you run your application, you will see that even your application runs in Internet Explorer 9, 10, 11, as well as the older version less than 55 Chrome. And then there are a few instructions. These are all self-explanatory, so we don't have to worry about this. I'm going to just say undo and exit from this particular file. So basically you have all these files that can be managed in your application. A few other things, for example, assets. That means anything in your assets. Generally, the assets folder contains images and generally images, icons, or you may have some videos and so on. So they would be kept over here. So and in right now in assets, you can see that there is nothing at this point in time. But in case if your files, if your project requires some kind of a static images, it's a good idea to keep that in the assets folder and refer to that in your HTMLs wherever that is required. It also has a reference of styles. This is where we will come back and add another entry for our Bootstrap. And in case if you have third-party scripts, you can specify that here as well. It's an array of all the scripts that you require. And they will be bundled into your application dynamically. This also has other options to, for example, do internationalizations, which is another topic which we will cover in depth later. Let's close this. And if you go to the src main.ts, it says here some basic stuff. But don't worry about this. We'll come back and look into this main.ts in detail. But as far as our application is concerned, the files that matter is the index.html. Again, we generally don't come and edit that here, but you can come back and add some CSS which are not accessible via the node or npm. You can add it directly over here, which is generally not a good idea, but we will do that in case if required. This is the only part of the, this is the only content in the HTML. You don't have to add anything else. Now, surprisingly or strangely, you can see that there is something called approot/approot, which is not an HTML tag, but it looks like HTML tag. Now, basically, this is ideally this is supposed to be something like data-app-root, but then browsers don't complain about the tags that are not known. Now, what actually happens is that when you run your Angular project, there will be additional script files injected over here. You will see that in a minute. Those include Angular framework. Then when the Angular framework is loaded into the JavaScript VM, it will scan once again for all these tags and looks for this particular tag and then starts injecting components here. Now, where are the components? The components that are created are generally kept in the app directory. It's a convention. We can always say, no, it's not going to be an app. It's going to be somewhere else. But app is considered as your project folder. So everything that we are going to code is inside this app. And as you can see that there are a few files already created for us. The first one is the app module TS. Now, Angular is all about modularization. It says that you code a lot of things, but you group them in modules. There's one module that is created, and this module is called ng module. It's written as ng module, and it's called as app module at this point in time. We can always rename this if you want. But that has a bunch of references here. For example, this declaration block consists of all the components that we create here. And we're going to spend a lot of time on this one. And then there is other modules that my modules may depend on, which is like in this case, it says browser module. So the browser module basically is about providing the browser or DOM manipulation, you can say, because we don't do any single DOM manipulation unless you want to integrate jQuery and stuff like that. But otherwise, we won't be using any DOM manipulation. So that's about here. So imports, we're going to refer to some external modules. It could be our own additional modules also. Providers, this is a place where you're going to list out all the services that we're going to have. We will come back and look into this in detail. And Bootstrap, it says that, hey, this is the component that will be looked in the index.html. Now, if you just happen to look at the index.html for a minute, it says here approot/approot. So this is where it's going to say, when Angular starts bootstrapping, it says, hey, I have to look for this app component in the index.html. And app component is identified using this tag. The question is how? So if I go to the app component, so this is basically something that is imported from this app.component, which is this app.component.ts. If I open that app.component.ts, you can see that it's exporting a class called app component, but it's decorated with at component. And one of the things that you will see here is that it says app-root. And this is the selector. So since there is no special symbol associated with this like dot or hash, it assumes that it's going to be used as a tag, app root slash app root. And that's what actually we see here, app root slash app root. So if I had said here dot, for example, then it looks for a tag, any tag with a CSS class of app root. So this will not work. In this, instead of this, I may have to say div class equals to app dash root slash div. This is how it should be given. Or in case if I had used a hash instead of a dot, then I must have to give here ID equals to app root. So basically the selector of a component determines how that component is identified in your HTML. So I'm going to leave it as it is. We will come back and look into that later, change those things and explore or experiment on those things. But for now, I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm going to save this file and save this file too. And you can see that this is a straightforward class with a member variable called title. The title says first app here. And this title is a variable that can be used in the HTML corresponding to this component. So every component will have an HTML associated. Right now you can see it says template URL, and that template URL corresponds to the same folder consisting of app.component.html, which is right here. If I open that, you can see it's a HTML file consisting of some div with some image, then there is a welcome to, and you see this variable. That variable is coming from this particular part, and this special symbol here, curly brackets, double curly brackets, called interpolation or handlebars. Handlebars is the API that provides the support for this template parsing. But anyway, the value of the title will be injected over here. We have some h2, then we have some links here. So we're going to not touch any of these stuff, and we will run our application and then look into how this is going to go. So I'm going to open a new terminal. All right, I'm going to open a new terminal. Right now I'm already in the CD first. I've already done first tab. I'm going to say ng serve. This is actually going to start a development web server. When it starts, it's going to use Webpack, and Webpack is going to bundle all the files that we have, the HTML, the TS files, everything, CSS, everything into one single JavaScript file. And then it'll also start our application. So if you want, you can also say -O to open the default browser and serve the HTML file, the index HTML. So if I do this, it might take a while because it's the first time it's opening, and it's going to look into all the files that we have, compiles starting from the main.ts, and then gets into the entire tree structure and builds the resultant file. One thing it also does is it's going to keep that server up and running here. As you can see, it's still running. Whereas every time I make some changes, you will see that the changes will be immediately affected over here. For example, if I go back to the Visual Studio Code, let me reduce the height of this. So instead of this welcome to title, I can say hello, this is my, and then I'll just use the title. And as soon as I save it, you will see that there is a compilation going on, and that compilation will, once the compilation is done, it's going to trigger a refresh in the browser. All I have to do is to press Command S or Control S on Windows, and you will see that it's recompiling, and in a while you can see that it starts and restarts my browser, and it says, hello, this is my first app. And instead of this first app, I can go back to my source code of this here, and I can say that this is my first Angular 7 app, and I'll save it, and the same thing happens, and you can see that the variable is now printed over here, my first Angular 7 app. And if you want to remove those links and stuff like that, what we see here, so I can get rid of that entire ul/ul, save it, and you can see that it's gone, right? Of course, this also I don't need, so get rid of that, save it, it's done. As you can see, it's pretty fast, and this is where you can go and change a lot of things, you know. So for example, I can go back and add a new component, and the components are again a bunch of TS, HTML, CSS files. That's the whole thing that we want to do here in the subsequent application. Now, in case if you want to add Bootstrap, for example, let's say if I type here a button, I can say button. Now this has an emit abbreviation, so the Visual Studio Code supports emit abbreviation, which means I can create something like btn button.btn dash primary, and then I can use a curly bracket, say this is a button, and I can press enter, and you will see that the complete HTML code is generated out of that. And this is a really super cool option. We will be using this throughout our Angular application, and by the end of this you should be very comfortable with this. So I'll save this, I go back to the browser, I see a button. That's pretty ordinary button. But if I go to getbootstrap.com, and you'll see that there is a this is from Twitter, which is a very popular CSS framework. And if I go to documentation here, there is a button. As you can see under components, I should see buttons, and there are these buttons: primary, secondary, success, danger. So all I have to use the appropriate CSS class names here. So btn is required, and then btn, secondary, primary, success, danger, warning, and so on. And this is very well documented, so you can always come back and have a look at us how to work with a button or anything for that matter. But in order to work with this, first I need to install. So what I'll do is I'm going to Control C here first. So the development server is stopped, and then I'm going to do npm I for install, and this time no -g, because it's not a framework you're installing, it's just a set of library files you're installing. And this is how you do Bootstrap, and this installs locally. For example, once I press enter, you'll see that it's going to go to the net and download the necessary library files, and also updates this package.json. So let's go and have a look at that in our editor. So I have here package.json, and you'll see that package.json has now been updated with Bootstrap 4.2.1. I go to node modules, you will see that there is Bootstrap somewhere. It's all sequentially, alphabetically listed. I go to, okay, sometimes it doesn't refresh here. There is a refresh option, click on that, and now I should be able to see under node modules. All right, so you see Bootstrap here, there's a dist, and there is a CSS and JS. I'm going to select CSS, and you can select this bootstrap min.css. Now this is the file that we have to update in angular.json. So I'm going to go into that Angular. You can press Command P or Control P on Windows, and you type here Angular. You can see that I get angular.json. I see that over here. This is the location where you can add some CSS. For example, I can go here and say node_modules. That's the location where we have. Under that, we have what's called Bootstrap. So we have Bootstrap, dist, CSS, and then bootstrap.min.css. And with a comma, and save it. And any changes to the angular.json file that you have done, in order for that to take effect, you must stop the development web server, which I've already done, and then restart it. You can do either ng-serve or you can say npm start, one and the same. This time I don't need the browser -o option because it's already open. And once I do this, if I go back to the browser and check my application, I should see a button changing with a CSS applied on that. Alright, so it says compiled successfully, didn't refresh here, so let's do that manually. So when I do a refresh, you can see that now the button is a blue color button. And of course, if I go back to my VS Code, change this from primary to say danger, for example, save it, and you can see that's going to be a red button in a while, right? So plenty of options in Bootstrap. Let's explore that as we go forward.